You might think that love is enough to make two people work, but there's something more complex at play. Something deeper, older, more structured. And it isn't just about what you feel in the moment. It's about what sustains over time, what integrates into your psychological architecture without creating chaos. And if you're not meant to be with someone, the universe, or more accurately, the structure of reality itself, has ways of letting you know. The tragedy is, we often ignore these signals because we're too focused on avoiding discomfort. We're too afraid of confronting loneliness. One of the first signs is the persistent presence of confusion. If you're constantly unsure about where you stand, if every step toward clarity leads to a fog of mixed messages, that's not love, it's destabilization. Human beings need a certain degree of predictability in relationships. Not because we are rigid or robotic, but because psychological security is foundational. If the emotional ground beneath your feet keeps shifting, that is not a test of your devotion. It's a signal that your psychological needs are not being met. Consistent confusion is not romantic mystery. It's the nervous system begging for order. Another signal lies in your sense of identity. Do you feel like you're growing in their presence or shrinking? If you're constantly adjusting your behavior, silencing your voice, or downplaying your strengths to keep peace, you're not in love. You're in self-erasure. And the universe will whisper this truth through your restlessness, your frustration, your internal sense of disintegration. We tend to think the right person will complete us. But the truth is, they won't complete you, they will reflect you. And if what you see in that reflection is distortion, that is not a soulmate. That's a soul lesson. Observe the patterns. The fights that seem to follow a script, the apologies that never come with meaningful change, the emotional highs that are quickly followed by emotional withdrawals. You might tell yourself, this is just how passion works, that no relationship is perfect. And that's true. No one is perfect. But there's a crucial distinction between imperfection and incompatibility. One can be worked through with maturity. The other is a sign that your foundational frameworks don't align. And the more you try to force it, the more the universe will create tension, resistance, and setbacks. Not to punish you, but to protect you. People often dismiss the role of timing. But timing isn't just coincidence, it's context. If every attempt to move forward is blocked by logistical barriers, emotional immaturity, or life being perpetually not ready, then the universe is telling you that alignment is not present. Love requires readiness, mental, emotional, and circumstantial. Without it, you're building on unstable ground. The lesson here is not to push harder, but to pause, to examine whether the universe is redirecting you for your own good. Sometimes the right person at the wrong time is actually the wrong person, because they delay your growth, obscure your vision, and entangle you in prolonged emotional confusion. Let's also talk about energy. A healthy connection fuels you. It inspires creativity, enhances focus, and provides emotional stability. But when the relationship starts draining your energy, when it becomes a vortex of overthinking, anxiety, or chronic emotional labor, you need to listen. Your nervous system is a more honest interpreter of reality than your wishful thinking. If being with someone regularly triggers fight or flight responses, if you're always recovering from emotional wounds rather than building a future, it's time to accept that love should not be a battlefield, not when the war is internal. And yet, perhaps the most overlooked sign is your own intuition. that quiet voice you keep dismissing, the gut feeling that something's off, the discomfort that never goes away, no matter how many times you explain it away. Intuition is not irrational. It is compressed experience. It's your subconscious mind compiling data you consciously understand. When it whispers, it's speaking from 1,000 micro observations. And if it keeps whispering, or worse, starts screaming, it's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. We are often so obsessed with making things work that we forget to ask whether they should. We turn red flags into projects. We transform misalignment into challenge. And we confuse endurance with love. But the cost is high. Emotional bandwidth wasted, potential diminished, years traded for illusions. When the signs are there, when your peace is disrupted, when your values are diluted, when the future looks like an increasingly vague shadow instead of a clear path, it is not defeat to walk away. It is wisdom. The universe does not always shout. Often, it speaks in closed doors, in delayed responses, in misconnections, in gut discomfort, and in the slow crumbling of dreams that were never meant to be built in the first place. These signs are not designed to break you. They are designed to awaken you. Because when you stop clinging to the wrong thing, you create space for the right thing to emerge, not just in love, but in life, in purpose, and in the alignment of your most authentic self. When something is wrong in a relationship, the first place it shows up is not in the other person's behavior. It's in your internal world. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, in the weight pressing down on your chest, in the way your mind won't rest even when everything seems calm on the surface. Emotional disturbance is not random. It's not just a temporary glitch in your system. It's a language, and it's one that most people don't take seriously enough. When you're with someone who's not aligned with you, your values, your pace, your vision, the mind and body will resist, not through loud protests, but through subtle unrest. And that unrest is worth examining with clinical precision. You wake up with tension in your body and you don't know why. Conversations feel like they require extra energy. You catch yourself replaying interactions, looking for hidden meanings, trying to decode silence. And it's not because you're overly emotional or anxious by nature. It's because your nervous system is trying to tell you something. There's an incongruence between what you are trying to believe and what is actually happening. And instead of confronting that reality, you suppress it. You tell yourself it's fine, that relationships take work, that you're just overthinking. But you're not. You're detecting signals of psychological dissonance. And the more you ignore it, the louder it gets. Not in volume, but in impact. The first lie people often tell themselves in these situations is that love should feel chaotic, that it's normal to feel uneasy, that emotional turbulence means passion. But that's a distortion. True intimacy creates safety, not chronic stress. And when your body is in a constant state of alertness around someone, that's not chemistry, it's misalignment. It's your deeper self recognizing that this connection isn't sustainable, that your spirit is contorting to fit into a mold it was never designed for. And so the anxiety builds. The emotional confusion multiplies. You're not functioning at your best because your energy is being consumed by an internal conflict that never gets resolved. That's not love, it's erosion. Most people assume emotional pain in a relationship stems from conflict, but in many cases it stems from confusion. You can't find your footing. You feel like you're walking on a psychological tightrope. One misstep, one word out of place, and the entire emotional climate changes. That instability is a sign. It tells you that there is no solid ground here, that your sense of self is being compromised by the very structure you're trying to build with another person. And yet, many continue to ignore the signs because they're invested in the idea of the relationship more than the reality of it. The human psyche is designed to seek coherence. We need our beliefs, emotions, and behaviors to be in alignment to feel whole. When you're in a situation where you're constantly justifying contradictions, rationalizing away your own discomfort, or pretending not to notice the inconsistencies, you are fragmenting your psychological integrity. The result is exhaustion, not just physical, but existential. You start questioning your own perceptions. You doubt your instincts, and that is a dangerous place to be, because once you stop trusting yourself, you lose your compass entirely. What people don't realize is that this kind of emotional misalignment doesn't stay confined to the relationship. It spills into every area of your life. Your work suffers because you can't focus. Your social life shrinks because you're too emotionally drained to show up fully. Even your sleep becomes disrupted because your subconscious mind won't stop processing what your conscious mind is refusing to accept. And all of this is happening not because you're with a bad person, but because you're not with the right one. There's a difference. Misalignment isn't about fault, it's about fit. You try to adjust, you try to adapt, you try to shrink or expand to make it work. But every time you do, a part of you disappears. You begin to lose touch with what you actually need. You become fluent in emotional compromise, but illiterate in emotional clarity. And the universe, or reality itself, continues to show you this truth, not through one massive event, but through repeated micro experiences of misalignment. Each one seemingly small, but cumulatively powerful. They are your cues. They are not here to destroy your hope in relationships. They are here to restore your trust in yourself. People often wait for a dramatic betrayal or a final breaking point to give themselves permission to walk away. But the truth is, the breaking point often happens long before the relationship ends. It happens when your body starts to feel tired for no reason, when your smile feels forced, when your laughter doesn't come as easily, when you have to work harder and harder just to feel okay. That's the evidence. That's the signal. You don't need catastrophe to confirm what you already know in your bones. And still, most people wait because they think ending something is failure. But ending something that's fragmenting you is not failure, it's wisdom. It's respect for your own psychological structure. If your inner world is in chaos, no external connection can bring peace. And the longer you stay misaligned, the more you lose yourself in the process. So pay attention to the internal disruption, not with fear or panic, but with curiosity. Ask what it's trying to teach you. Ask what it's pointing toward. Your mind and body are not your enemies. They're instruments of clarity, and when they speak, through unease, fatigue, confusion, or silence, you owe it to yourself to listen. Because sometimes the universe doesn't show you the wrong person through obvious flaws. Sometimes it reveals misalignment through the subtle erosion of your peace. And when that happens, it's not asking you to fix the relationship. It's asking you to fix your direction. Human beings are creatures of habit, and one of the most powerful tools we possess is the ability to recognize patterns. In relationships, this becomes a necessary form of intelligence. When two people repeatedly fall into the same conflicts with the same themes and the same outcomes, that's not an accident. That's not just miscommunication or timing. That's a signal. A relationship based on reactive cycles rather than proactive growth becomes emotionally stagnant. And what you'll often find is that instead of evolving past problems, people begin to normalize them, excuse them, and in some cases even romanticize them. It starts small: a raised voice, a cold shoulder, a missed call with no explanation. And maybe the first time it's easy to look past. You tell yourself, everyone makes mistakes. And that's true. But when those mistakes become predictable, when they follow a rhythm, it's no longer about imperfection. It's about repetition. And repetition reveals character. You cannot separate who someone is from what they consistently do. This is not about judging others harshly. It's about understanding that consistent behavior over time is the clearest form of communication a person offers. Words can lie, intentions can be distorted, but patterns are honest. What's most dangerous is how easily we can be pulled into the trap of rationalization. We tell ourselves that someone is just going through a phase, that the stress will pass, that the inconsistency is circumstantial, and sometimes it is. But if the same issues show up in every season, if apologies are followed not by transformation, but by temporary changes that fade back into old habits, then you're not dealing with a one-time event, you're witnessing a stable pattern. And stable patterns should never be ignored, because they reveal the emotional climate you will be asked to live in long term. People often underestimate how much they tolerate for the sake of potential. You fall in love with what someone could be, and you hold on to that image, even as reality continues to prove otherwise. But love should not be an active imagination. It should be grounded in the observable. What does this person actually do when they're hurt, stressed, disappointed? How do they communicate during conflict? Do they take accountability, or do they deflect, deny, and blame? These are not minor traits. They are core indicators of emotional maturity and relational health. And if you continue to excuse these patterns because you don't want to start over, or because you fear being alone, then what you're doing is bargaining with your own peace of mind. This becomes especially clear in relationships where cycles of hurt and healing are constant. You hurt each other, apologize, reconnect, and then repeat. This creates a kind of emotional dependency that feels like closeness, but is actually instability. You begin to bond over recovery rather than progress. And the danger in this cycle is that the highs feel so intense after the lows that they convince you the relationship is growing. But what's actually happening is you're becoming addicted to the emotional roller coaster. You mistake emotional intensity for emotional intimacy. And that is a costly illusion. What you need to look at is sustainability. Can this relationship function under pressure? Can it grow in peace, not just survive in chaos? If the only time you feel connected is after an argument, then the relationship is not stable, it's reactive. And reactive systems are not safe. They burn out. They consume energy, creativity, and confidence. And over time, you start to notice that you're not yourself anymore. You become smaller, more cautious, less expressive. Not because someone told you to change, but because your environment trained you to. Another key insight is to look at what triggers are constantly being activated. If you find yourself being pushed into the same emotional corners, feeling unworthy, unseen, rejected, again and again, you need to ask whether the relationship is reinforcing wounds rather than healing them. Healthy connections challenge you, yes, but they do not constantly place you in emotional survival mode. They do not keep you guessing about your worth. And if that's what's happening, then the pattern is not just unhealthy, it's telling you that the emotional foundation is cracked. Growth in a relationship requires reflection and adjustment. If you bring up your needs, your pain, your truth, and the response is always defensiveness or indifference, that's a pattern. If communication only works when you're silent or agreeable, that's a pattern. And these patterns aren't just frustrating, they are predictive. They show you what the future of that relationship will be. And the longer you stay, the more likely you are to internalize those patterns as normal, or worse, deserved. The educational responsibility here is to become a student of behavior, not just emotion. Love is not only about what you feel, it's about what is consistently shown. When someone values you, that value shows up in their habits, not just their words. People can say anything in the heat of a moment, but what do they do when no one is watching? When it's inconvenient to be kind, when compromise is required, that's when truth appears. And when that truth reveals a pattern of neglect, avoidance, or manipulation, your task is not to justify it. Your task is to see it and act accordingly. The most painful realization is not that someone can't love you. It's that they keep loving you in ways that hurt. And if you keep accepting those ways, then your silence becomes permission. Your endurance becomes encouragement. You teach others how to treat you by what you accept repeatedly. And no one is coming to save you from the consequences of ignoring these patterns. So don't look at apologies. Don't look at grand gestures. Don't look at the moments of charm. Look at the patterns. They will tell you everything. And when you finally decide to trust what you see, you'll no longer need to be convinced to stay or to leave. You'll simply recognize that relationships built on broken patterns never lead to wholeness. And that realization, though painful, is the beginning of real freedom. There's a principle that governs not just human relationships, but all forms of interaction. Emotional gravity. Much like physical gravity pulls objects toward each other, emotional gravity draws people into alignment. When the connection is right, when two people are meant to be in each other's lives, there is a natural pull towards stability, mutual growth, and emotional reciprocity. It doesn't mean there won't be challenges. It doesn't mean every moment will be perfect. But it does mean that the connection at its core feeds both people. It supports their individuality while fostering unity. When emotional gravity is absent, you feel it. You feel like you're constantly pulling, constantly giving, constantly working to hold things together that were never meant to be held in the first place. One of the most telling signs of misalignment is emotional exhaustion. If being with someone consistently leaves you feeling drained rather than energized, that's not love, it's emotional labor. It's your inner world reacting to the lack of support and balance in the relationship. And this kind of exhaustion isn't always loud. It doesn't necessarily come with tears or dramatic outbursts. Sometimes it shows up quietly in your lack of motivation, in your constant overthinking, in your inability to fully relax. You start feeling like you're walking uphill emotionally every day without a break. That's a sign. A relationship that aligns with emotional gravity won't drain you. It will anchor you. It will give you something to stand on. When two people are emotionally compatible, their energy moves in tandem. They don't compete for space. They don't constantly misunderstand each other. There's a shared rhythm. They don't have to explain every feeling. defend every need or negotiate constantly just to be understood. That mutual understanding may take effort to build, but once it's there, it serves as a foundation. When it's not there, every interaction starts to feel like a negotiation, and every emotional need feels like a burden you're not sure you're allowed to have. That's not sustainable, because emotional gravity doesn't just hold people together, it gives them momentum. Without it, progress feels forced, unnatural, and temporary. What makes this difficult to see is that emotional attraction can sometimes mask the absence of emotional gravity. You might be deeply drawn to someone, fascinated by them, even obsessed, but that doesn't mean you're aligned. Obsession is not stability. Desire is not compatibility. You can be pulled towards someone for 100 reasons, chemistry, history, trauma bonding, and still find yourself emotionally starving in the relationship. The illusion is powerful because the high moments feel so real, so intense, that you start believing they compensate for everything else. But they don't. Emotional highs followed by consistent lows do not create a balanced relationship. They create an unstable one. And instability disguised as passion is one of the most deceptive forces in emotional life. When emotional gravity is present, communication becomes easier. Not effortless, but easier. You don't have to spend days decoding text messages or wondering if you're being too much. You're not constantly performing emotional gymnastics to earn affection or avoid abandonment. There's a sense of ease, of flow, even in conflict. Disagreements don't become emotional warfare. They become moments of recalibration, not destruction. When that kind of flow is missing, the emotional feedback loop turns toxic. You give more, hoping to stabilize the connection, but the more you give, the more unbalanced it becomes. Eventually, you lose sight of whether you're building something real or just trying not to be left behind. There's also something to be said about how you feel about yourself when you're with someone. Emotional gravity means you feel more yourself, not less. You speak more freely, you laugh more fully, you imagine more boldly, but when that pull is absent, you shrink, you hesitate, you censor your truth because you don't trust that it will be held with care. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you become a version of yourself that is safer but less alive. That internal dulling isn't caused by a lack of love. It's caused by a lack of resonance. When people are truly meant to grow together, they activate the most honest, expressive, and expansive versions of each other, not through pressure, but through presence. The emotional balance in a relationship should not feel like a scale you constantly have to adjust. If you're always compensating, trying to be less needy, more tolerant, more patient, just to maintain connection, you are in an emotional system that is lopsided. And that imbalance will become more pronounced over time, not less. Because emotional gravity, like physical gravity, reveals itself most clearly when you stop trying to control it. If it's real, it will hold. If it's not, it will slip, no matter how tightly you grip. This is why many people stay in emotionally unbalanced relationships longer than they should. They believe their effort can manufacture what only mutual alignment can create. But emotional gravity isn't something you can force. It's something you either feel or you don't. And if you don't feel it, no amount of effort will replace its absence. You can build routines, share memories, even plan a future. But without that natural, stabilizing emotional pull, the relationship becomes a burden more than a bond. You know emotional gravity is missing when you feel lonelier with the person than you do alone. when your presence is not met with presence, when your voice echoes instead of being heard. These experiences are more than unfortunate, they're educational. They're reality speaking to you through the medium of your emotions. And the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. Relationships are not supposed to pull you apart internally. They are supposed to align with your emotional center and elevate it. When that alignment is missing, it's not an insult, it's a signal, a message from your emotional intelligence that something is off, something essential. And instead of fixing yourself to fit into misalignment, the wiser choice is to recognize what the imbalance is telling you. Because when you're with someone who truly resonates with you, the energy flows naturally. And when that happens, you no longer feel like you're holding on. You feel like you're being held. Timing is one of the most overlooked yet crucial elements in the architecture of any relationship. People often assume that if there's love, if there's attraction, if there's potential, then that should be enough. But what they fail to understand is that emotional readiness is not a given. It's a developmental state. Just because two people feel something for each other doesn't mean they are both psychologically equipped to turn that feeling into a healthy, sustainable partnership. Love requires more than emotion. It requires capacity. And that capacity is shaped by timing, where each person is mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually at the moment they meet. You can meet someone who seems perfect for you in theory, but if they're still healing from a past they haven't made peace with, they won't be able to show up for you in the present. If they're still driven by old wounds, unresolved grief, or unprocessed trauma, that will bleed into your connection. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. You'll feel like you're always chasing a version of them that you know exists but never fully arrives. And that gap, that painful space between who someone is and who they could be, is often where people get stuck. They wait, they hope, they try to become what the other person needs, thinking love will fix what time has not yet prepared, but people cannot be rushed into readiness. Just as you can't pick fruit before it's ripe and expect it to nourish you, you can't force someone into emotional maturity before they've developed the self-awareness to sustain it. If they don't know who they are, they can't protect who you are. If they haven't stabilized their inner world, they will destabilize yours, even with the best of intentions. Because it's not about wanting to love you, it's about being capable of loving you well. And that distinction is vital. Sometimes the universe doesn't keep you apart because you're wrong for each other. It keeps you apart because you're not yet right within yourselves. And in that gap, in that frustrating space between what could be and what is, you're being given a very specific kind of education, one that teaches you the difference between desire and readiness, between potential and reality. And if you ignore that lesson, if you try to build something before the emotional foundation is ready, what you'll create is not a relationship, but a pattern of disappointment. When someone is not ready, they don't show up consistently. They give you moments instead of momentum. You have flashes of connection, of depth, of possibility, but they're short-lived. And you find yourself trying to stretch those moments into meaning, trying to hold on to them as proof that it's worth staying. But those moments are not the relationship. They're fragments, glimpses. And when the timing isn't right, those fragments never form a whole. You find yourself in a cycle of almosts. Almost committed, almost healed, almost aligned. And over time, almost begins to chip away at your sense of worth, because you're offering your whole self to someone who can only give you pieces. Timing also influences clarity. When you're not ready, you don't see clearly. You project, you assume, you imagine. You fall in love not with the person as they are, but with the story of who you want them to become. And in doing so, you lose track of what's real. You ignore red flags. You dismiss your intuition. You shrink your needs to fit the situation because you're too attached to the idea to face the reality. Timing brings everything to the surface. It either confirms or exposes. And when you're honest about where someone is, not where you want them to be, you stop living in emotional limbo. You stop waiting for readiness that may never come. One of the hardest things you'll ever do is walk away from someone who feels right but isn't ready. But it's also one of the most necessary, because staying in a relationship where only one person is prepared to do the work of growth, communication, and vulnerability isn't love. It's self-betrayal. You teach yourself to settle for less, to overfunction, to absorb the emotional cost that should be shared. And the longer you stay, the more you become emotionally conditioned to see imbalance as normal. Readiness isn't about perfection, it's about responsibility. Are they willing to own their wounds? Are they willing to learn how to communicate in a way that honors both people? Are they building a life with space for partnership, or are they still chasing distractions to avoid their own reflection? These questions aren't about judgment. And discernment is what protects your peace when emotions try to override your wisdom. When the timing is right, you don't feel like you're dragging someone into the relationship. You don't feel like you're constantly explaining why your needs matter. You're not left questioning whether they're serious or simply attached to the convenience of your presence. The energy is different. There's reciprocity. There's presence. There's forward movement. And when you're both ready, the relationship becomes a space where growth is mutual, where love is expressed through action, not just feeling. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go, not because you don't care, but because you do. Because you recognize that no matter how much you love someone, you cannot do their inner work for them. You cannot speed up their timeline. You cannot create readiness out of hope. You can only choose to honor where you are. And when you do that, when you choose alignment over attachment, the universe responds, not always by bringing that person back, but by bringing you back to yourself. So if the timing isn't right, pay attention. Don't try to force a future that's not grounded in present reality. Trust that when both people are truly ready, love won't be something you chase, it'll be something you walk into. Fully seen, fully supported, fully chosen. And until then, your work is not to wait. Your work is to grow, to evolve into the version of yourself that doesn't settle for almost. The version that recognizes timing isn't just about fate. It's about emotional truth. And truth always knows when it's time to stay and when it's time to walk away. There are moments in your life where you are torn between staying and walking away, between fighting and fleeing. The heart aches, the mind loops endlessly, and the soul seems suspended in a vacuum of indecision. You ask yourself, is this love holding me back or calling me forward? And in that question lies a greater tension, the confusion between spiritual endurance and emotional entrapment. See, in an age dominated by instant gratification and a consumer-like approach to relationships, we've trained ourselves to dispose of people when difficulty arises. But not all storms are signs of destruction. Some are catalysts for the deepest transformations. And so we have to wrestle with the possibility most people overlook that perhaps against the current of cultural wisdom, you are not being called to move on. You must understand that love, real love, is not rooted in ease. It is forged in the fire of responsibility. There's a reason why your soul resists severing the bond. Not because you're weak, but because some connections aren't accidental. Some are sacred assignments. But how do you know when you're clinging to illusion and when you're holding on to purpose? How do you separate the trauma bond from the soul bond, the pain of a toxic attachment from the labor pains of destiny being born? The answer is not a simple checklist, nor is it found in superficial advice columns or shallow social media slogans. The answer lies in discernment. A word most people think is synonymous with judgment, but is actually something much deeper. It is the skill of the soul, a refining fire of the intellect, a wrestling of the will. And it is in that space of discernment that these 8 signs begin to emerge. They are not thunderous announcements or divine ultimatums. They're quiet, powerful indicators embedded in your everyday experience that whisper, stay. There is still something unfolding here. Let us begin then by understanding that to recognize a sign is to admit that life is not merely mechanical. It is meaningful. There are patterns. There are archetypes. And sometimes, when the logic of the moment fails, it is wisdom itself that intervenes, not to instruct you by force, but to reveal the path by invitation. You still have to choose. But you must choose with eyes open, not eyes blurred by longing, nor eyes jaded by hurt, but eyes trained by truth. The first sign is peace in the midst of chaos. You may be surrounded by conflict, disagreements, or confusion, but when you think about the person, not just the moment, there is a peace that passes logic, a quiet certainty that this chapter isn't finished yet. That peace does not excuse the struggle, but it gives it context. It says, keep going. There is still work to do here. The second sign is the undeniable growth you've experienced since they entered your life. Relationships aren't merely sources of affection. They are mirrors that reveal, challenge, and sharpen who you are. And if this person, despite the hardship, has been a consistent catalyst for your character development, your discipline, or your spiritual maturity, that may be something to pay attention to. Growth that persists through pain is often a hallmark of something providential. The third sign is alignment, not perfection. You find that your visions, values, or even wounds seem to intersect in a way that produces meaning, not manipulation. The relationship might be difficult, but not because it's breaking you, it's stretching you. And in that tension, you glimpse a greater harmony. Your lives seem to orbit around shared convictions, even if the execution of those convictions is still flawed. Another sign is timing that is too precise to be accidental. You've tried to walk away before, you've tried to sever the tie, and yet something keeps bringing you back, not just out of sentiment, but through specific events, conversations, or changes that reawaken the bond when logic told you it should have been buried. That kind of timing is not random, it's rhythmic. And it may be signaling that this is not a conclusion, but a preparation. Then there's the way they show up, not just in your life, but in your mind, and not in a haunting or obsessive way, but in moments of clarity, in times of decision, in prayers, in dreams, in the silent moments where you ask for guidance and their face arrives like a still frame in a film you haven't finished watching. That recurring presence is not always emotional residue. Sometimes it's spiritual resonance. We must also examine the resistance to closure. You've probably noticed that every time you try to move on, there is a part of you that doesn't cooperate. Not because you're addicted, but because you're intuitively unsettled. Your mind may say it's over, but your spirit knows otherwise. That gap is worth exploring. It could mean your story with this person has more pages to turn. And let's not overlook the role of conviction. Conviction is not convenience. It is the quiet, steady pressure on your soul that says, this matters more than your comfort. Conviction pushes you to forgive again, to try again, not blindly, but boldly. And when that conviction endures, when it doesn't fade with time or distance, you must pause and consider, perhaps you are not done here. Perhaps you are being formed by the very thing that's frustrating you. And finally, there is confirmation, not in superstition, but in small, repeated affirmations that show up in your environment. You hear words that echo your thoughts. You read something that mirrors your prayer. You meet someone who says the very thing you've been wondering. These confirmations are not coincidences. They are coordinates. And if you're attentive enough, they'll point you toward what logic alone can't see. So when you ask, should I move on? Don't just look outward. Look inward. Look upward. Look around. Not every trial is a signal to leave. Some trials are thresholds. And if the signs are there, those deep, quiet truths that keep surfacing despite your doubts, then maybe you're not being told to move on. Maybe, just maybe, you're being called to stay and see what redemption looks like. We live in a time where confusion is almost a permanent background noise. You wake up confused, you go to bed uncertain, and in the moments between, you're bombarded with countless voices telling you what you should do, how you should feel, and when you should walk away. Clarity in that environment is no longer the norm. It's a rare occurrence. And yet, clarity is precisely what we need when we're making the most important decisions of our lives, especially in relationships. It becomes more than a preference, it becomes a necessity. And here lies the challenge. The heart feels something, the mind wants something else, and the spirit is often left unheard in the middle of that chaos. People will tell you that when you're confused, it's a sign to leave. But confusion in itself is not always a warning sign. Sometimes confusion is just a fog you must walk through to find the truth. It's not the end point, it's the beginning of discernment. What matters is what exists beyond the confusion. Is there peace behind the noise? Is there stillness beneath the anxiety? Because if there is, then you're not lost. You're just in transition. And transition, while disorienting, is often a doorway to clarity, not the dismissal of it. Emotional confusion doesn't mean the relationship is doomed. It might mean you're being challenged to look deeper than you've ever looked before. Confusion can be the evidence of internal conflict, the kind that arises when you're being pulled between self-protection and self-sacrifice. One voice says, leave before you get hurt again, and the other says, stay and fight for what matters. The tension between those two voices creates emotional friction, and that friction is uncomfortable. But that discomfort doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it means you're standing at a crossroad between a version of yourself that would rather run and a version that's ready to grow. You have to ask yourself a hard question. Where is this confusion coming from? Is it born out of unresolved trauma, fear, past betrayals, or is it the natural byproduct of facing something that matters more than you expected? Because when something doesn't matter, the answer is easy. You walk away, you forget, you replace. But when it matters deeply, when the connection has roots, then clarity comes not in the form of detachment, but in the form of depth. And depth always involves turbulence before it finds stillness. That's why clarity must be pursued, not passively waited on. You can't sit around hoping for a perfect moment when everything becomes obvious. Life doesn't work like that. Sometimes clarity only reveals itself after you've chosen to stay still, to be quiet, to look beyond the surface of your emotions and into the underlying pattern. Clarity is what remains after the emotional storm has passed. And sometimes in that stillness, you'll hear a quiet but unmistakable voice say, "This isn't over yet." There's a certain kind of clarity that doesn't arrive as a loud proclamation. It comes as a whisper in your spirit saying, "Don't give up yet." And it's not based on fear. It's not about dependency. It's not about being too afraid to move on. It's about a subtle, powerful pull towards something that still has purpose. You may be emotionally exhausted. You may be mentally overwhelmed. But if your soul is still settled,